Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to probably the last video in the F15 series for the build. So the next video will hopefully be the maiden flight. In this video we are working on the wings and the final steps of this aircraft. So the wings are the last big step. We've got the CFG to deal with, a little bit of radio programming left to do, and we are pretty much complete. So let's roll that intro and we will get back into the build of this plane. All right guys, first wing here, this is the right wing. And I think the wings are going to be fairly easy compared to the rudder. The rudder was the first surface that we did, and it was a bit of a nightmare. If you remember the very first video, or one of the first videos, where we had very little room. Fortunately, these covers in the wings are substantially larger. Well, not substantially, but enough where you don't have to go crazy with dremeling all this stuff out and cutting it out. So there's much more room on the cover for the servo. So this is how we've done it. Same thing as the rudders. We've got these massive beefy horns. I think these come from kind of like the RC car world, but they are insanely strong. And I've already test fit it, but that fits in there. So next thing we have here is we're going to get the flap servo all set up, but then the horns as well. So we will touch on this again. But when you do your horns, you want the pivot point to the horn to be on the pivot point to the surface if you can. So the pivot point on the surface, if I look down in there, is about there, which lines up with where we have the horn positioned. And then I've marked out on the surface with really light Sharpie marker how far we want that slot to be opened up. So now we know where to open that slot up, and that's the step for the aileron. So pretty simple to put together. When we're ready to put the surface in, it just simply goes over top of the fiberglass tabs, screws in, and this is the rod assembly that comes with it. So it's knurled on one end, threaded on the other side, and it threads right into the end of the surface itself. So slick setup, very, very well done. If you're building one of these planes, there is no hole in the wing structure. So there's a piece of like really thin cardboard type material back here, Eric's maybe if you want to call it that. And literally we took the piece of the rod and just kind of poked a hole through there, and it was no problem. So went through there, came over here. So this is our aileron connection. The flap servo, that just gets installed. The servo connector comes through the wing opening, and then we can make our multi-pin connector, which is on the other side of the fuselage. So that's the next step. We're going to get these things bolted in as well too. They're a really, really nice, accurate fit as well too. There's no fasteners in here yet, and this thing's already nice and solid. So very well done. All right, so aileron surface on the right wing is installed. The rod that goes all the way through, it's pretty easy to get in there. There is a blind nut in there, so we put just a small dab of blue Loctite on to keep that in. And as I've talked about, the rods have a flat blade screwdriver on the end for fitting, or blade. This one, we don't need to put Loctite on there because it's got nowhere to go because the wing sitting against the fuselage. So no need to Loctite that, but we're going to get the flap on, and then we will think about doing some horn action. All right, guys, so we did a few things here. Number one, we opened up the opening in the wing so the connector can slip into the wing side here, because we're going to keep the fuselage side as the small little hole. So when you put the wings in, this is just going to slip inside the wing, and we got lots of space there. While we were doing this, we opened up the slots in the surfaces, just like we did on the rudders. That's why I didn't show you the steps with this, because we've already seen this in the video. So just use my Dremel, open that up, and get a nice fit on there. We sanded the side of the servo, or the horns themselves, put 20-minute high sol in there, and both of them are set up. Now we tape the perimeter so it makes a nice fit. Once it's installed and kind of kicking off or curing a little bit, you can take a square and just run it up against the side of the servo arm or the horn and just make sure that's nice and square. And that is done. So pretty quick on the wing install. The only thing left that we have to do once this cures, so tomorrow, is we will then hook up the rods to the servo and surface and get those nice and centered. And then we can also put our rails on as well too for the ordnance package, which they're already pre-drilled and set up. So that should be fairly quick as well. All right, so it's the next evening, guys. Our horns are all in the right place. What we're doing now is I've just got the wing positioned on the fuselage, and we've got the connector hooked up to the receiver in there, and the receiver's still loose. We haven't set that in place. And again, this is why I use these connectors, and I put the pins on the wing side so you can carefully plug in an extension, run your surfaces without having it tied into the plane. So little tip time for you. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to hook the aileron up and make sure that we are centered, and then we are going to hook up the ball joint to the aileron. And then when we do the aileron and the flap, we've got a matching wing to make sure that we can build the other wing to match this one. All right, guys, wing is all set up and basically ready to go. We've got a little bit of programming to do on the flaps, and I'll show you a little bit about the flaps here and why I put my flap switch where I do. But we're all set up and ready to go. The pylons for the ordnance have been mounted. Keep in mind that you do need to shorten these screws that go into the sides, because the stock screws are all the same length, so they're far too long. They'll punch out through the other side. So anyways, that's done. Everything's all preset for the ordnance, which is great. You don't have to do, as far as I've seen so far, you don't have to do any fiddling, any drilling, any cutting, which is different because on the Skymaster kits I've built, like the F15 as an example, you basically have to assemble the entire ordnance package, figure out how it's mounting and stuff like that. So this is a very, very nice setup on this FB Jets. Everything's all pre-drilled, pre-tapped and everything. So really, really good job, guys. Okay, so this wing's done. What we're going to do is we're going to fit it back in the Revic wing bag just to make sure that it actually fits. And then we're going to move on to the next wing. All right, guys, so I'm just going to show you here why I set my flaps up where I do. So I know everybody sets their radios up different, but this is my standard flap switch right here. Now, the reason I set that up that way is if you're coming in for a landing and then you need to do a go-around, my flap switch is off when it's forward. When I start my plane up, all my switches go forward. So my thinking behind that is you're going to throttle up and you're going to want to push your flaps forward maybe if you need to bail out. So that's why my flap is there. The other reason to put your flap on a 3-position switch, I'll show you. Now this is not going to be generic for every radio system, but this is the way that the Spektrum works. So the owner likes to have his flap set up on this slider, which I typically use for my brakes. Now, when you have your flap system on a 3-position switch, you've got a whole lot of adjustments here. Flap to elevator compensation. On my JR28X radio, I've got way more adjustments here than this one has, but you can also adjust your speed of your flaps as well too. So that is something that is nice to have in this menu. So if we go and switch this to be on the right slider, right lever, you now lose all of that adjustment. So yes, you've got sort of infinite adjustment on your lever, but you lose all of your mixing capabilities as well, all your adjustment capabilities. So I'm not a huge fan of this, but that's where the owner likes it. And so that's where we're going to set it up, which means that mechanically we need to try and get that other wing as close as possible because we don't have as much adjustment as we would using that other flap system. We've got to adjust it in servos. So just a little side note for you why I use a 3-position switch on my radio setup. All right, guys, other wing is complete. Other than putting the rods on, we got to wait for those to cure, so we'll probably do those tomorrow. And we've got them all lined up, and we actually put a little dot of CA there. and just to make sure that they stay in the right spot and also the right height. So what we did was we measured the first ones we made, and we just matched the surface to hole location. We matched that up on the flap and the aileron, so both wings are very, very close to being even. We've got our wiring harness and everything done up. We've got our pylon mounted. So this wing is basically done. So next thing we're going to do is we are going to plug in some of the connectors into the receiver on the plane. We're going to get the plane up on the table. We're going to get the stuff mounted on the plane, and we're going to get the Xicoy CFG machine programmed and ready to check this thing over. Confusing moment here as we're plugging all the rest of this stuff in the receiver. So this is one of the 20 channel receivers from Spektrum, and keep in mind we just figured this out that don't use channel 13 and 14. So what happens is 1 to 12 works in channels 1 to 12, but then when you go to 13, which is X3, it actually is channel 15. So don't plug anything into 13, 14 because it does not work. They're basically blank channels, and then it goes from 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So now that we actually figured that out, everything seems to be working finally. Alright, there she is, fully assembled for the first time with all the stuff in there. So we got all the batteries jammed in the nose here right now, so all 5 of those batteries. There's no cockpit, but we've put 360-ish grams, 340 grams into the cockpit section, just so we can simulate the cockpit being in there. And she's a big plane. Crap, is she ever big. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up the Xicoy scales, and we're going to do all the measurements for the CFG and see how it comes out, and then see what kind of weight we need to add, where we need to add it, and that'll give us a good starting point. Well, there she is in all her glory. She is quite tail heavy. So it came out as, I'll show you guys here. So I said, when we had our guesses, I said 55 pounds, Chad said 57 pounds, and sadly I lost. He was by far more correct than me. So it came in at about 56.5 pounds, and we do need to add a crap load of weight to this, but that's the initial weight. There's no fuel in the UATs. The UATs, if you remember, are actually behind the CFG. So the CFG is roughly here. The UATs are back just a little bit further. Yeah, somewhere in that range. So we do have to add that weight, so which probably brings it right to 57 pounds. And then if we go to the CFG, you'll see that we're tail heavy. So you got to remember with the CFG number, it's not referencing your CFG on the wing that the manufacturer gives you at all. What this is actually referencing is your measurement here. So you've got the mains measured, the CFG point brought down from the plane measured, and this is 132 millimeters right there. And our measured CFG right now is 76. So instead of being 132 from the mains, we are 76, so kind of the halfway point. So this last number that you enter in when you're programming this thing is the weight, or the distance from the mains to where you're adding the weight. And the reason this is important is because it tells you roughly the amount to add. So it's saying we have to add 2.63 pounds in the nose, 1,320 millimeters ahead of the nose from the CFG point, which we kind of said was roughly in this area. So with all that being said, we basically need to add this pack of lead just as a rough calculation, to the nose. So when we add that on the nose, it brings us almost exactly perfect. So we're at 131 millimeters. We're 0.02 pounds tail heavy, so we're basically bang on with that. So with the way this plane's designed, I don't think we could have really changed a whole lot because there's not a ton of room in the front to do a lot of that stuff. Now I know with the older versions of this, the nose would actually be removable and guys would put some stuff in the nose here, but that's no longer an option without changing the design of the plane or the nose section quite a bit. So it's either heavier batteries or adding some lead. All right, guys, so I just have both wings hooked up to the plane here. The other one's sitting over there, just because we're setting the flaps up, and I want to try and get this as close to the other one as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the aileron up first. Just we've got our center point there. So you do need to drill out the fiberglass or G10 horns to an appropriate size so our nut and bolt can go through there. But I'm going to get that set up, and then we'll set the flap up. Mechanically, I think we're pretty close. I've got everything kind of paired to each other and figured out on the slider, just so it's hopefully as even as possible. Ultimately, the final setup we'll have to do when the plane's has the wings on, is level, and all that kind of stuff. But we can get it really, really close at this point. So, all right, guys. So we just are kind of getting stuff organized here. So all of the servo lines and extensions and everything have been run through the right-hand side of the fuselage. And obviously we want to keep everything away from the gear as much as possible, which it is. And we plugged in or hooked up the linear actuator, and that is the last thing that needs to get plugged into the receiver. So there's all the servo lines. Unfortunately, there's really no good way to hide this stuff, but at least it's serviceable and it's fairly organized, I guess, if you consider the mess organized. But unfortunately, that's just the way it works out sometimes. We've got basically most of the battery connectors going down the right-hand side of the fuselage, and then near the front there, we're just sorting out battery installation. Now, my buddy who does my 3D printing, he came up with these awesome, phenomenal battery mounts. Cool thing about these battery mounts is he designed them so the batteries sit vertical, which obviously is really, really smart. It's simple, but smart because it helps you save room, right? So on the front of this airplane, we're actually going to be able to stack 4 batteries side by side and tuck one in the middle, and we'll be able to get those batteries as far forward as possible. So great little mounts, and these aren't listed on the website, but if you inquire, they are available. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some radio programming just to get the canopy programmed properly, where the servo or the air locks open and the canopy actuator opens all the way, and vice versa when it closes. So you want to do this obviously without the canopy installed, because you're going to damage something if you leave everything installed. So once we're happy, we can work on the limits and stuff, but that's the next thing we're focusing on. All right, guys, so initially the steering servo was just set as a rudder channel. Problem with that, and you can probably do this, I don't know how to do it with a Spektrum radio, but I don't think there's a way to do it. You can't turn that channel off when the gear switch is up. So what we did was we changed this channel, which is X11 or channel 11, X1, sorry, or channel 11. We changed it just to a channel all by itself. And then we have a rudder to X1 mix, which allows us to set it active with the switch A, which is the gear switch, in one position and not the other. So now with gear in the down position, it works. With the gear in the up position, it doesn't work. So just a little tip there for you. Sometimes you gotta think outside the box, because with these new radios, there's so many different ways to do something that usually maybe a different way is better, or it would help you achieve the goal that you're looking for. All right, well, we've just spent a couple hours trying to get this canopy to work. Our struggle was with this V2S valve. It basically is not holding the programming for the limits. So when you program these things, you have the power off, you hold down the button, you turn it on, you release the button, and it starts flashing. You put it to one extreme, you push the button, put it to the other extreme, push the button, and we found that sometimes it would work, turn the power off, turn it back on, and it wouldn't work anymore. So it's not holding the setting. So what we've done is we had a spare Jetronics valve, and we just plugged this in, and lo and behold, it just worked. Just like that. Just worked.
Not fun.
Didn't really have to do anything. It just started working. It was quite phenomenal. So what we need to do is we pulled this valve out. It was an absolute nightmare. We're going to switch it with the Jetronic valve and put this one in instead. So fortunately, it's fairly easy to swap. We just have to get it lined up properly with the proper supply and everything. It is backwards, but we'll figure it out and make it work. And to mount this thing, because we don't have good access in there and our bolt pattern has changed, or our mounting pattern. All right, so the canopy is golden. One bad air valve causes many, many hours of frustration. So everything works now. We've got everything set up. The linear actuator has been adjusted. Just a couple tips when you're dealing with something like this is this stuff is not going to be accurate, and it's going to have a little bit of play side to side. So you got to be prepared to deal with that kind of stuff. So what I did was I took a angular drill bit and just added a bit of a bevel on these holes. What that does is when the pin for the canopy comes down, if it's a little bit off, it'll hit that angular contact point and slide in. So that just is one little helpful step. It didn't take much, but just a little bit of an angle on it. I put a little bit of silicone shock oil on there again because it was sticking a little bit on the pin. And now everything works beautifully. Yeah. All right, guys, so at this point, we're just going through all the tests and checks and setup of the aircraft. So what we just did is we just learned the turbines to the radio, so that's all done. What we're going to do now is we're going to put some fuel in the tanks and fuel system, and then we're going to prime the turbines and just confirm that they work. One thing I'm going to do here right away is go through and put shoe goop on these connectors on both of the ECUs. And then we're also going to do the receiver as well too, which is right down in there. So we've got all those connections to deal with. And we're getting really, really close. And tip time for you guys. So remember, when you're CFGing, center of gravitying your turbine aircraft, you want to do it in landing condition. So what that means is on this particular plane, our CFG is, I'm just going to say here on the tube, we've got tanks in front of the CFG. Our UATs are also behind the CFG back here. So if you CFG this plane with zero fuel in the tanks, you're never going to be landing with zero fuel in the tanks. So we've added about an inch of fuel in each tank, which would be a reasonable, very reasonable landing condition. Probably going to be landing with more fuel, I would suspect, but that does affect the CFG. So remember, we had to add about 2.5 pounds of lead in the nose to get our CFG correct. And with just that weight in those tanks, we should be adding a lot less weight. So just something to think about. Always CFG your plane in the landing condition. All right, guys, it's back on the table and we are in our landing condition. So we don't have a cockpit in there, but we do have 360 grams of weight in there to substitute for the cockpit. So all of our batteries are in the nose. Everything is on the plane. We've got about 1 inch of fuel in each of the fuel tanks. And we are up to 60.25 pounds as total weight. And then our C of G. So big difference on the C of G. We were at 2.5 pounds, I think, yesterday when we did this initially, and now we're at 1.89 pounds at the correction point. So basically in our nose, we need to add just under 2 pounds of lead. So that's the next step. That's one of the things we're going to do, and basically get this right on the mark, and then we should be good. All right, guys, we got this big bag of lead sheet, and we are working with the scale and some respirator, hazmat suits, gloves. We've got medical personnel on standby. And 867 grams right there of lead sheet. So now we're going to put that in the nose and see where it comes out to be. So I know a lot of guys say they don't like to use the Xicoy scales because it is far too technical, but you can see here, so Chad's putting the weight in the nose right now, and you can watch that change as the scale adjusts. So right now our measured C of G is 130. We're supposed to be at 132 from the gear. We are 0.09 pounds still tail heavy, which is pretty much nothing. So we're 2 clamps shy. So we're about 3 ounces of weight that we need to add in the nose, but that's really stinking close for probably for the maiden flight. We can put a little bit more in there, but that brings us into the right wheelhouse. Now we just need to find a pretty way to put that lead in there. Well, there she is in all her glory. She is basically done the build process. There's still a little bit of cleanup left to do with weights and stuff like that. We've got these temporary weights on there in place of the cockpit. The lead that's right there needs to be mounted underneath the battery tray, and the battery tray just needs to be bolted in. But that is basically it, guys. We do have a cockpit coming made by our lovely friend Joe, who's doing a custom cockpit for this thing. So absolutely beautiful. It was a fun build. If you guys did follow along with the build process, you obviously know about the ups and downs of this plane and how everything went together and how some of the stuff didn't go together. So if you are interested in one of these FB jets, F15s, this one came from Global Jets, and they're pretty easy to find on the internet, but fun plane to build. I think it's going to fly like a treat. So keep your eyes open for the maiden flight video. It should be coming up very, very soon. And I expect this thing to fly like a dream, like most F-15s fly like. We've got the C of G programmed. We've got the elevators programmed to the right location, according to what the internet says. So it should be tons of fun. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below. Give the video a thumbs up, and we will see you in the next video.